Hi, and welcome to this third quarterly webinar sponsored by the PsyOp Bridge Builders Committee. We exist to spread the word about IO psychology to those who may be interested in potentially pursuing a career in IO psychology. And the topic of today's webinar is stress at work and also consulting careers in IO psychology that have a strong emphasis on research and statistics, as well as federal government as clients. So first I'm showing you this slide for the next webinar so you can mark your calendars for November 15th at 6:30 Central. And the topic will be a very popular one these days, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have a great panel of practitioners and academics from across the board in terms of background and education and the type of work they do. So you'll want to make sure that you get that, and if you want to reach out for more information, details are on that QR code that takes you to a survey. Details will be there for contacting us. So tonight I'm going to start the webinar by talking about some of my research. So I am a professor of management at Baylor University in the business school. I work with the HR major specifically, so mostly with undergraduates majoring in human resource management. And I also work with psychology students who come over to the business school to work on research with me on the topics that I study in my research stream. So I work with a lot of students who are pursuing IO psychology as a graduate decision. My particular research stream, my overarching research stream, is really stress at work. So I'm going to start with some definitions to get an idea of what it is that I actually mean when I say certain terms. So the first thing is stress. So we talk about stress as an activated state of being, or a state in which external or internal factors are consuming the resources that we have. Stress can be a good or a bad thing, a negative or a positive thing. We often think of good stress or beneficial stress as eustress, and this is where we talk about happy things that occur in life, but maybe also are exhausting or require a lot of our attention and other resources. So things like getting married, moving, starting a new job, they're all good things, but they also can be stressful. Another type of stress is the more negative types that we might default to when we think about stress. Things that consume our resources and really can harm us if we don't manage them well. So things like conflict at work, overwhelming amounts of work, ambiguity about how to get a job done, maybe micromanagement or other negative types of leadership styles that we might deal with coming from our boss, all the things that cause us angst. And so that creates this activated sense of having to deal with something challenging in our environment, and it can cause a detriment to our well-being, which is the second box here. So well-being is a state of a plentiful amount of resources balanced against the demands or the stressors that we face. And our indicators of well-being can range from forms of strain like low levels of exhaustion, low levels of burnout, to high levels of engagement, to emotional well-being, physical well-being, physiological well-being, neurological well-being, spiritual well-being, all of these different ways that we can assess our health. Essentially, we can talk about well-being. And then that leads to the final box here on resources and demands. I've mentioned these a few times already. Resources are any tools that we use to address the challenges or the stressors we face. Demands are another term for stressors, things that cause us angst, things that consume our resources, challenges that require more of us in terms of dealing with those in our life. So, in terms of the way we talk about these different views of stress, I'll mention at least three. There are more, but the first view is focused heavily on resources. And I would say this might be the most popular view of stress in the literature. And resources, as I said, are any tools that you can use to address stressors or demands that come at you, challenges you may face. Maybe they're tools you use to achieve your goals or to work toward your goals. They can be things that we talk about internally, that we bring to the table ourselves based on who we are. They can also be external resources that our job provides or the environment provides. They can also be intangible, like energy and time, things that we can't hold and touch and feel like we could a tool like technology, but it can be intangible or tangible. And the main theories here are conservation of resources theory and the demand, job demands and control, or job resources and demands theory. So we see several different types of theories focused on resources. The second view has to do with appraisal. So this is how we look at the stress that we face and then how we decide to handle it. So Lazarus and Folkman are the main contributors here, or the original authors on this, on the transactional theory of stress. And they say that we really have two phases of appraisal. So when we're first faced with a stressor, we have primary appraisal, where we really decide the initial assessment of what it is we're facing. And then the secondary appraisal is more deliberate, where we really decide how to address what we're facing. So that would be a more cognitive view of stress. And then the systems approach, there's not one specific theory, but there are quite a few work family researchers that talk about stress in the form of systems by talking about the systems in which we find ourselves. So we all belong to a larger macro environment that constitutes a system, and different parts of the system affect other parts. So we're all interdependent. So if you think about your family as a system, when something happens to your parent or your spouse or your sibling, that affects you as well. So that's the systems view. So in this model, I call this a practical stress management model that really consolidates a series of studies that I've done and thinking that I've done in this area. And so I'll go through each of these, but the main premise is that if we think about good strategies for managing stressors, for using our resources, and then ultimately building resilience, then we can really optimize our well-being overall. So we'll start with this reminder. Our goal is not to eliminate stressors altogether. Our goal is to manage stressors well. And so to do that, we have to balance the resources we have against the stressors that we face. And so seeking the right resources and then using them well is going to be key to this framework or this model. So in terms of the stressors, I'll start with the example of when you're thinking through this model of the 4 R's is what I'm calling it. So if we first think about we're dealing with a stressor and we need to know how to manage it. The first thing we have to do is recognize that we're facing a stressor. So when we're feeling angst, when we're feeling unease, discomfort, we need to recognize why. So that's the diagnosis. And then we need to reflect, and I apologize for the animation here, we need to reflect on what it is exactly that's causing us angst. What is the stressor? What is the nature of it? What is the enduring nature of it? How long will it last? And really just to understand more about why it's causing us angst. So then the next step would be to reframe that. So to ask ourselves, can we look at this in a different way? Can we look at it as a challenge that can help us learn and grow? Can we look at it as something we might turn into a resource, which we'll talk through next? Can we think about it as something that is short term and therefore able to be managed without a lot of angst? So just adjusting our mindset. And then the final step would be to redirect, and this would be in terms of our mindset and our behavioral strategies. So how are we going to think about it differently, and how are we going to cope with it or manage it in the most effective way possible? So if we step through these 4 R's in an example, we can maybe see some concrete ways to apply this. So imagine Susie, she has a very high workload. So if the first step is to recognize, that would mean recognize the cause of the stress. Why does she have a high workload? Is someone giving her an unreasonable level of work? Or is she doing something that's creating a high workload? Or is really, even as a first step, does she have high workload? So she's feeling angst. Why is she feeling angst? Maybe it's the high workload. So really to recognize the source accurately, and then to reflect on how it's affecting her, how she's reacting to it, and what the results of her current coping strategies are. So is she dealing with it in a way that makes it better or worse? Is there something she can do to really help make it better as she reflects on what's already happened and what she's done to this point? She might also reflect on why this is affecting her so poorly, or why she thinks this is such a strong form of stress to begin with. So asking those good questions of ourselves. Then we can reframe. So is there an opportunity here to change how we manage it, to change how we view it, or to even turn it into a growth or learning opportunity? So maybe high workload actually implies high responsibility that we might need to seize and take advantage of to further our career. Or maybe it's an opportunity to reassess our priorities and decide, how do we want to view a high workload, and do we want it, or do we need to redirect in our lives? And so that brings us to redirection, where we decide, how are we going to view it, a new mindset, and what are we going to do about it? That's the new strategy. So by reflecting, by recognizing, reflecting, reframing, and redirecting, we're thinking about stress in a different way, or at least more deeply and intentionally, and this can help us to manage the stress more productively. So that brings us to using resources well. So one way that we manage stress is by using the resources that we do have very well. We want to be effective in that usage. So as an example, again, we're recognizing what resources do we have. Can we reflect on how we're using them, why we are or are not using them, and then how can we reframe the things that we're facing into more or additional resources, or maybe more useful resources. And then finally redirecting to change our mindset and our strategy to do a better job of using our resources. So going back to the same example, imagine, again, Susie has a very high workload, and let's also add something else. What about lots of interruptions? So first, she can recognize the resources that she does have to address the workload that she's facing, and maybe some untapped resources. Interruptions are a prime source of potential help, where we often just view them as hindrances. So think about, then we reflect on, how are the resources that we do have or that we're missing, how do they affect her? How is she reacting to those? How is she using them or not using them? And then reframing. So could we turn, for example, the interruptions into a resource? And as I mentioned earlier, can we turn the workload into an opportunity to actually become a resource for future opportunities or for future situations? And then finally, we redirect. So our new mindset and our new strategy changes how we view and use our resources going forward. So you might ask yourself, but I don't have a lot of resources, or what resources do I even have? So as I alluded to earlier, we can have internal or external resources. And these can be anything ranging from our psychological capital, which I'll talk more about in a moment. This could be our personality, our energy, our resilience that we have built up, or it can be external, things like other people's help, social support, or it could even be things in our job characteristics that help us get things done. All of those could be helpful as tools. But the key is to say, how are we using them? So are we using them well? No matter how many we have, are we using them well? And that's the focus I've been taking over the last several years. So one way to think about this as a baseline is, once you're using your resources well, you can build resilience. And resilience is one aspect of a broader construct called psychological capital. So psychological capital includes these 4 different traits: hope, efficacy, optimism, and resilience, that help you view and address challenges or stressors with a new sense of confidence that you can do it, but also just knowledge and a peace of mind that you can do it. So you think rationally, you plan ahead, you know there'll be obstacles, but you know that you can get through them. Together, all of these work together. And if we're people of faith, then that even adds another dimension. There's quite a bit of empirical research actually that shows the different aspects of faith and spiritual practices can help you in this way as well, help you build a lot of resilience. And so resilience is one aspect, but really overall, it's an internal resource you're building in the form of this psychological capital. So tying it all together to give a more concrete example, if we want to think about one way we can manage our stressors and use our resources better, and then really overall build resilience, we can think about boundaries. So boundaries are a great way to start to do all of these things. So the first one would be time. Time is a very valuable resource. And in terms of stressors we face, the lack of time or the constraint of lack of time is something a lot of us face. But if we think about how to build boundaries around our time and use our time better or more effectively or efficiently, that can be one way to think about really building our resilience overall and our overall stress management strategy. The next one is space, and I again apologize for the animation. The space construct really could be, where do I work best? Where do I do certain tasks better than others? How can I build boundaries around my workspace and my non-workspace? How can I ensure that I am restoring my resources when I'm not working? So all those questions could be attacked by the space question. And then expectations. What are my expectations of myself? And what are others' expectations of me? And where should I build better boundaries or communicate better in a two-way fashion with people maybe in my life in terms of work or non-work? And then finally, goals. So if we get to goal setting and we think about the goals we have and others have set for us, can we build healthier boundaries around the goals we are trying to prioritize and pursue? So all of these ways could be a really concrete way we could think about how to manage the stress we do face, how to use the resources we do have well, and how to build resilience by being more intentional through all of these processes. So I have on here the ways you can connect with me, and I would love to hear from you if you have any follow-up questions. And now we will continue with the rest of the webinar as we go to Jen Gibson to describe her work in consulting and specifically research and statistics and how that can be used as an applied researcher.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for hanging in for part 2 of our presentation and for your interest in IO psychology. As Sarah said, I'll be talking today about careers in applied research. I hold a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and I'm accredited as a statistician by the American Statistical Association. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the VP of Advanced Analytics at Forrest Marsh Group, where I have worked for 16 years. So I think we have a cozy group of 70-some people today. Again, please ask questions in the chat, or if you have them after, I'm happy to talk through those later. Okay, so SIOP, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, classifies IO careers into 4 main sectors. There's academia, industry, government, and consulting. I work in a research and consulting organization, but we collaborate with those in government, industry, and academia. So for example, we have clients and partners in industry and government and have research partners in academia as well. So it's helpful to understand each sector and the differences and similarities among them. Within the consulting sector, you can also draw like a finer distinction between management consultancies and research. Both will focus on addressing clients' problems related to topics like organizational culture, organizational change, and managing expansion and growth. But one difference between the two is that management consultants will provide an outside perspective and strategies for improvement that don't necessarily produce knowledge that applies outside that organization. Researchers, in contrast, will generally have greater interest in theory and creating generalizable knowledge that applies to other situations. The number of levels and diversification of roles in an organization will depend largely on its size. In smaller companies, you're more likely to see fewer levels and more individuals wearing multiple hats. Educational requirements can also differ by organization, but many will hire people with four-year degrees in a variety of social science, business, and other majors, as well as those with masters and PhDs. As the arrow indicates here, there's those who enter a non-management track will also have high promotion potential, but you can see it's kind of broken out into those who will eventually supervise other individual contributors, and then supervise supervisors, and then the highest level there is generally an executive level. Whereas those who go down a non-management track will focus highly on their technical skills and not as much on management of people. So within these tracks, any one person's focus can be weighted more or less toward three different areas: managing people, managing projects or portfolios, and research skills. Project managers coordinate the contributions of those individual contributors, and they also have external client-facing duties. I started as an individual contributor with a research methods and statistics focus, then progressed to being in charge of projects, then supervising junior researchers, then senior researchers and other managers. And then as a director, I was responsible for short-term planning and the development of a division focused on statistics and research methods. Now as a VP, that extends to longer-term planning and overseeing multiple teams and divisions. I'll highlight 9 major elements of an applied research job, starting with research skills. My department's focus includes research methods and statistics, reporting research results for a variety of audiences, always considering practical application. Routine reporting like descriptive statistics to more complex analyses like time series, cluster analysis, and data science techniques, including natural language processing. And then there's also experimental design, qualitative and quantitative research methods, including survey and data management methods, and social science theory, such as theories related to attitude change or decision-making. Another element of the job is client management. We work with clients in both the public and private sectors, although my work is more heavily weighted toward the public sector. We collaborate with clients in a variety of capacities, since some clients are more knowledgeable about research or a specific content area and participate more directly, as opposed to looking for more of an outside expert opinion. We're always working toward what was promised in the contract and sometimes need to navigate unforeseen issues. Project management is one of the areas of focus I noted earlier. And that includes leading the work of a team to achieve project goals, using available resources, specifically that's labor and other direct costs. Some researchers will also pursue their project management professional or PMP certification. There's also hiring and supervision, especially if you go down that management track. Supervisors monitor the well-being and work performance of our teams and help guide professional development, thinking of each individual as well as the team and company's needs. We monitor workload across team members and determine when a new hire is needed and at what level. If a new hire is needed, hiring managers work with human resources on the selection process. Business development means securing more business for the company. Our work is contract-based, which means there's an agreement between the firm and the client about 3 main things: what tasks will be done, in what period of time, and how will payment be handled. While we're executing work for our clients, we're also simultaneously trying to establish new clients and win additional work with our current clients. If some of your clients are government agencies and offices, that means you'll need to become familiar with the world of government contracts. A few important concepts include contract vehicles, which are pre-vetted lists of companies that can provide services for the government, and requests for proposals or RFPs, which are written summaries that the government issues to describe work that they would like to be done. There's also the concept of pricing, or estimating how many hours of labor and how much you'll spend on purchases in order to complete the work that's promised. As a researcher, as a professional, and as a person, there are multiple sources of professional and ethics principles. Your professional association will likely have a code of ethics. Your organization probably has a handbook or code, and your clients and partners will have their own professional standards that may layer on top of your own. If you collect information from human research participants, then you also need to be knowledgeable about human research protections and the groups that issue guidelines, such as institutional review boards and the Office for Human Research Protections. There can also be conflicts of interest to navigate, since you might work simultaneously with clients who are competitors with each other or have different missions or interests. Next, we have written and oral communication. As it pertains to the research itself, there's a matter of communicating with diverse audiences in presentations of all sorts, from longer written technical reports to shorter summaries aimed at an executive or general non-research audience. As it pertains to the management of projects, there's coordination and communication with many people, often from different departments and different specialty areas, and setting plans and goals and seeing them through. Finally, there's communication as it relates to management of people. There are performance conversations, talking about performance goals, helping develop more junior team members, and participating in those discussions with your own supervisor. You may also choose to remain active with your professional association. For many IO psychologists, that's PSYOP, and includes others or particular divisions within the American Psychological Association. It can help with maintaining and developing your own skills, staying in touch with colleagues, and being aware of developments in your field. You may engage in some activities outside work, such as volunteer or professional association activities like committees. And last but definitely not least, there's collaboration. In applied research, you'll work with people at different levels of an organization and from different disciplines. Some will be within your chain of command and others won't. And those collaborations will include partners and vendors and clients in long and short-term relationships. Elements of collaboration underlie all of the other activities listed here. If you're a job seeker or just interested in the kinds of roles at a company like ours, I'd encourage you to check out our job openings at forsmarshgroup.com. And I think there were 18 or so at the last time I checked. You can also take a look at our client list if you're interested in the kinds of organizations that we work with, and the link is provided here.
Thank you, Jen.
Sure.
One question came in for you saying, do you accept PhD students as interns in your organization? And a second related question, what skills do you look for in prospective interns?
Sure. We have had interns. I'd have to look back to check for sure, but I think that we have had students and those who are post-grad. But I have, they kind of run the gamut, and they've participated in internships in different divisions across the company. Let's see. Sorry, that question's showing is answered. As far as skills that we look for, it really depends on the department that's looking. So, we are largely focused on research. So of course your research skills are definitely relevant. It can be really helpful if you have some exposure to managing projects. So if you were the lead on a research project or something like that, that can be helpful. If you've ever assisted a professor with a grant, then you might have some exposure to useful information, related to business development.
Great. And there's another question on here for you. Who do you often work with when collaborating with federal agencies? Top level leadership, local HR, specific local offices? What area of IO is often requested? And and this person says, as a current government employee, I've never seen IO psych specialists brought in, and I'm curious what it could look like.
Okay, a lot of questions there. Okay, who do we work with when collaborating with federal agencies? That's partly why I would encourage you to take a look at our longer client list on our website. Let's see, others, a few example government agencies. We do work with the FDA and NIST and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We do work with the Department of Defense. So hopefully that helps provide a couple examples, but there is a longer list on the website. as far as top level leadership and different offices within those agencies, again, it really depends the groups that are issuing those requests for proposals or putting out other solicitations looking for contract work. It depends. So it is often, you know, I guess in my experience, groups that have a need for research to inform very practical decisions and processes. So it really could be anywhere, not necessarily like localized within groups that have IO-like areas of focus like HR, really could be anywhere. What area of IO is often requested? Many. Sometimes it's more of the bread and butter IO topics, like you know, related to personnel or related to training. Other times, maybe you could consider those IO adjacent topics. So areas where you can apply IO skills, but maybe you weren't trained on them formally. So, you know, one that comes to mind is marketing research. Let's see. And then as a current government employee, okay, you're curious what it could look like. I mean, different areas of the government, there are so many offices and agencies are probably, you know, consumers of IO research at different levels. So, you know, I couldn't speak to the office where you're working. There is a lot of need for, you know, IO research and research, like I said, that's sort of adjacent to IO. But, you know, probably is uneven across different areas of the government. And I see a question about IO masters graduates as interns. Yeah, I probably, like I said, I don't have, you know, the qualifications of our past interns on me, but that sounds right to me. We've probably had a variety of different backgrounds, and we do hire, you know, permanent staff with, you know, all different degree levels. What kinds of issues do we help our clients solve? Really, there's such a variety. I mentioned marketing earlier. So one example there would be helping to test how well a communication effort is working. So what you can do if there's like a public service communication or some kind of like advertising or marketing, then we can look at that. We can evaluate how well people comprehend it, how much it affects the people who see it, how much it affects their attitudes and behavior, for example.
There's a related question down at the bottom. Diane Wentworth asked if you can provide an example of a specific project and the work those IO people, she said, completed. So I don't know if that you can build on that or provide another example of a type of project.
Let's see, if we're looking for specifics, let me see if I can pull something. I do want to mention that we do have case studies on our website and white papers. So if you'd like to read, you know, the nitty gritty and the details, please go see our work there. Kind of scrolling through to see if I can pull an example. Okay, so one area of work that we have done is looking at customer satisfaction with, you know, various government agencies, and one of them is the IRS. So we've done work with them evaluating how well various programs are working. You know, if you're looking to inform people or to have usable forms and things like that, you know, we can help out with that kind of problem. As far as what IOs do, we use our research design skills. We create psychometric measures or adapt them from the literature as needed. If we create something new or adapt it, then we're able to look at the psychometrics, look at how well the variables that you measure correlate with others that you expect there to be a relationship with. And as always, when you're interpreting and writing up the results, those are familiar skills in the area of applied research. One additional consideration is that you're writing it out for a more mixed audience. So sometimes you'll want to put things, you know, in more layman's terms for a short summary, but then also provide the technical details. So more like what you would see in a journal article in a more fleshed out technical report or other description. And thank you, Sarah, for helping me keep track of the questions.
Yes, absolutely. There's so a couple of follow-ups on more about your specific organization and work. If you see those. I think this one is following up on that earlier question. Which offices within those departments do you work with?
Yeah, I don't, that's kind of a broad question. I'm not sure how to name like specific government offices. Like in our Department of Defense work, we'll work, you know, programs that are joint services. So they, you know, are looking at the interests of all of the military branches at once. And then we've also worked with individual branches of the military, including, you know, the Coast Guard and the Army and so forth. I probably couldn't tell you the specific offices within, you know, NIST, for example, with the USDA. We've done a lot of work, some with the APHIS office. With FDA, some of our work has been with the Center for Tobacco Products, for example. Hopefully those are what you were looking for.
Very interesting. There's a couple of specific ones about, would you do this kind of work if you weren't in DC, I guess, in terms of your organization?
Let's see. That's a bit of a chicken and egg question, but I guess we can trace it back to the first contract that our company had back in 2002, and that was with the government. It was with the Department of Defense, and we had one project and expanded, you know, greatly from there over the course of, you know, what, 19 years now. So I suppose you could say that's why, but the company was kind of born out of that one contract.
I would also add that I know plenty of other people who do consulting with different federal government agencies that aren't in DC. So I know even a lot of professors who are in academia, but also do consulting, do a lot of work with various areas of DoD or just other areas of the government. So I think it doesn't really matter where you live. It's more about who you know, I think, who you get to know.
I think that's a good point. This work can be done from anywhere. It's certainly easier for us back when we used to meet in person if we ever needed to, but it's not essential to be located in this area. Okay, I have a question about work visas for non-Americans. Yes, I can say yes generally. I can't speak to individual cases, but definitely have known our company to sponsor some folks. How can I improve myself in this department? I'm not sure who asked this question. I'm not sure what department it is about. So in the area of applied research, I'm guessing. But I don't know if folks can take themselves off mute or add comments. Let me know if I'm interpreting that wrong.
Yeah, if that person who asked that question could add another question to be more specific. How can I improve myself in this department? What is your advice? What are you asking about, applied research or IO Psych, or can you be more specific on that question? Whoever typed that.
Oh, IO Psych. Okay. Knowing your baseline, I would say if you're not already in an IO Psych program and are trying to prepare yourself, there are a lot of resources on the psyop.org website. Specifically, there are introductory IO Psych materials. If you go to teachiopsych.com, that will bring you to a specific page within the PSYOP page. So it's Teach IO Psych, and Psych is spelled with a CH at the end. So I think you could start there. If you're already in a program and are looking to enhance your experience within that program, I would say participate in a lot of research. Try to get exposure to applied when you can. So helping with work that professors are already working on. If you have some professors who are doing applied research or who are collaborating with others, that's really useful experience. And any exposure to grant writing or project management is a nice way to round out your classroom skills.
I think this next one is related to that question. Paisley asked, how can undergraduate IO Psych students gain experience? And I can personally say, but we can also hear from any of the other panelists. I work with undergraduate students all the time who are seeking more to go to graduate school in IO Psych. And I realized I forgot to actually introduce what I do. I work in a business school. So I got my PhD at University of Houston in IO psychology. And then I went to work in a business school. I'm currently at Baylor University in the management department. And I work with HR students, but I also work with the psych students who are interested in IO psych. So they come over all the time. And if I have grant funding, which isn't all the time, they would be, you know, people I would consider to hire as research assistants. But I have a lot of students who volunteer to help me. And so they get project experience based on that in research. So that's a great way to get a little bit of experience and really see if you like it, see if you like the topics. If anyone else wants to add how an undergraduate student can get experience, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I would just recommend like getting involved in research. I know I'm always open to anybody when they ask to get involved, and certainly different research programs are going to have different levels of involvement of how much students do or what kind of things they do. In terms of getting experience in the working world, you know, I'd just say like, you know, apply for things that interest you. To me, as somebody who looks at people coming into programs, basically, I think any work experience is helpful because you've got a context for what all these IO things do. But if you can get something in HR where you get a little bit of exposure to that type of stuff, you know, that's always good too.
Absolutely. I think the main thing is to find the things that interest you. So don't do things just to get things on your resume, but also use those as learning experiences to figure out what you actually like. And if the topics of HR are interesting to you, then you probably would also be interested in the topics of IO psychology because it's kind of one aspect of IO psych. Does anyone else want to add anything on that? Ludmilla? Okay, let's go to the next question. Do you want to comment, Dr. Gibson, on work-life balance in terms of what you do? And then the rest of us on the panel could comment on work-life balance for us, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Work-life balance was the topic of my dissertation, so it's near and dear, and it's something that we talk about a lot. I think that it's probably hard for me to say, to answer that in a relative sense, since I have spent my career in applied research. I taught a couple courses as a grad student, but that's my only exposure to, you know, work in academic life. I think it varies a lot depending on the kind of organization that you join. And as you know, and it also varies depending on how you manage your work-life balance and how much you allow some permeability across those two domains. For me, I have prioritized keeping time for, you know, myself and my family and everything. So I do make a deliberate effort to work pretty, you know, kind of keep my work hours manageable. I try not to work late and to work on weekends. Sometimes, you know, something unforeseen happens and you might find yourself staying late one day. And then over the pandemic, a lot of us have been, you know, working from home, and we have been at FMG. So that's another challenge, I think, for folks who aren't used to navigating that split between work and home when all of that takes place in the same like physical area. So, you know, it's a kind of unique challenge over the past year and a half, but I think that if you can find an organization good fit with the kind of work life you're looking for, that helps a lot. It's a good question for you to ask about, you know, when it comes time to interview. And then there's also your active role in it and how you manage it too.
Absolutely. It's a lot about what you do to be proactive in all those boundaries I mentioned. Those boundaries actually are really important if you're working remotely, which a lot of people are now. And so I would say from an academic perspective, there's a chance for a really good work-life balance. You're never going to be perfectly balanced, and you're never going to have every area perfect. But if you do set your priorities and your goals and expectations, you know, according to your priorities, then you can achieve a really healthy work-life balance. And academia, it depends on the type of job that you pursue. If you go into a tenure track job, then you're going to focus a lot, depending on the type of university, you may focus a lot on research, or maybe you're more teaching focused. But those early years when you're seeking tenure, which is usually the first 6 years or so, it may feel a little more intense, and at times feel like you do take more work home on the weekends or evenings, but you don't have to all the time. And if you manage your time well, it's definitely possible not to. I personally have made a big effort not to do that except when absolutely necessary. And I just try to be really efficient in my time in the early mornings and during the day. And then, sometimes you do have to work on a project on the weekend, but that's how I would comment on it. Ludmila, do you want to add to it?
Absolutely. And I agree with both of you. It's really work-life balance is what we make out of it. And I worked in a very large global not-for-profit. I worked in academia, both as a professor and administrator. And really, it is what we make it. And I'm not the best example. I tend to do a lot of work. And I always feel like I have to represent and kind of multiple minority groups to which I belong to. So I was putting a lot of extra work on myself, as I realized later on. So I've been for many years working kind of extra hours until I really started learning, okay, I need to set boundaries. And it's really not as scary as it looks like, because sometimes you think, well, people are not going to like you anymore if you start setting boundaries, but they really are okay with it. So it is definitely what we make out of it, regardless of a particular position or particular type of organization. But yes, there are some organizations that have very unhealthy cultures, and you usually can figure it out in the interview process or by talking to other people. And then there are organizations with healthier, more balance-oriented cultures.
Great. Joe, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I was going to say that, in terms of careers in IO, like apply to the people that I know people who work 60, 70 hours a week and love it and choose to do that. And I know people in IO who make their own hours and, may only work 30 hours. I went into academia to kind of have that work-life balance. And, there's some times where I have lots of it and other times where I'm just as busy as anyone else, particularly during the pandemic. But if nothing else, I think academia brings you a lot of autonomy, and that really helps, from the stress literature, get through some of those more stressful times. And then just to piggyback back off of something that somebody said earlier, sorry, I don't remember exactly who, I think it was Sarah, that you might be more focused on teaching or you might be more focused on research. Keep in mind that those are options. I think if you go to a PhD program, you're probably going to be in a research institution, and it's going to feel like, oh, I need to do research the rest of my life. But it's a lot of people who go into academia, NIO, and teach is kind of what I did. I still do research and I love what I do, but I don't have that pressure as much as some other people do. And other people do a whole lot of research and love it. So just know that those are options.
Yes, absolutely. And if you watch the last 2 webinars we did touch a bit on that as well. All the different career paths that you can go into, whether you pick applied or academia. And I'll second the whole idea of the flexibility, the autonomy that we have in academia is really good. I mean, you really are you have a boss, but you also are your own boss to a large extent, because you decide what kind of projects you're going to work on and what creative new things you're going to do in your classes. And you get to decide a lot of that. So it's a nice fit for me and a lot of us who choose academia, but it may not be for everyone. Okay, we have a question here. What would be some of the main challenges that future IO psychologists would have to solve for the development of the discipline? That's a good strategic question. The SIOP president or executive board may be able to better answer. Does anyone on the panel have an idea? Anything come to mind?
I'll just throw one out there, and it's something that I would usually pay attention to. We're nearly not as diverse as you would like to be, and we definitely need to pay more attention not only to gender and race diversity, but also to topics like people who work in entry-level jobs, people who work in non-white collar jobs. Those have traditionally not been the topics we paid attention to. We need to pay more attention to well-being across different types of careers and different types of employees and various complex situations of intersectionality. There's a lot of underexplored topics which I think are going to be more and more important.
Yes, that's great. I see that in my work on remote work as well. A lot of underrepresented populations of workers that we have not really studied in the remote work literature, for example. And that kind of makes me think about research topics and I guess hot topics of the future. I don't know if that's the direction the person asking the question was trying to go, but there are on PsyOp's website, there are kind of always 10 hot topics for the next year or for each year. And you can find those are the big things. So the future of work and what is that going to look like? The role of artificial intelligence or AI, and how can we think about that in terms of IO psychologists and the study of work. So those are some ideas. There's another question here. How do IO programs differentiate between universities? You said some are research focused, some are not. It looks like Joe's typing an answer. I'll just go ahead and say briefly, Joe probably has a lot more insight here too with the different universities he's been a part of. I think most PhD programs are more research focused. Some are not, they don't require probably as much research as others. But then a master's program is definitely not as research focused. You're still going to get a lot of that training on statistics and research methods, but you're going to be prepared to go into an applied career. So it's going to be less focused on the research and your own research projects, most likely. Jen, do you want to answer this question? You could maybe type an answer or answer it about the American Association for Public Opinion.
Sure. Yes, I was just starting to type, but it's probably easier to answer that on the line. Yeah, that's a good question. The intersection is really in using surveys for data collection. So a lot of IO psychologists will gather their study data using some kind of written instrument. So that's a survey, and a lot of pollsters use surveys. And the extension that you're getting out of keeping in touch with the APOR community, the American Association for Public Opinion Research, is a better understanding of the role of sampling. So, you know, with a lot of our IO research, we have student samples and convenience samples, and they won't necessarily give you the basis for generalizing to a broader population that might be of interest. So if you use some of the principles of statistical sampling like APOR tends to do, then it's, you know, it's much more helpful if you're making those kinds of conclusions.
Great. Now to follow up on another question, so do most applied jobs not require a PhD? I wouldn't say that's necessarily true, but there are a lot of applied jobs that are that require at least a master's, or some may require a PhD. So I don't know if someone else can answer that more in a more helpful or detailed way.
Yeah, that's what I would say. One of the great things about IO is that there's jobs with masters. Some areas of psychology, you probably won't find much out there with the masters. What I generally tell our students, from what I can see from ads, is that the PhD seems to replace about 5 years of experience. So if you got your master's, it wouldn't necessarily like mean you couldn't get certain jobs. It would just take you a different route or a little longer to get there. I don't want to like say that's 100% true. Maybe there are some jobs where you have to have the PhD, but a lot of times when I see ads, it'll say PhD or master's with 5 years of experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It does sort of like, speed you up a little bit. You're spending those those years in your program as opposed to on the job. It does depend a little bit on the organization. Our job openings are typically written as, the degree or equivalent knowledge and experience. So we're pretty flexible with that. The one thing I will add as kind of a caveat is that with some of our government work, there can be requirements that certain experts hold a particular degree or have a certain number of years of experience. So in those cases, the employer might be looking for someone to fill those slots, and because of that, be applying the same requirements that the government agency is.
Thank you. We have a question here. If you are a work professional with a master's degree already, how does this help or hinder your ability to get into a master's program or a PhD program? Does one of our panelists who oversee master's programs want to comment on that?
I'm happy to. And we absolutely love people who are working professionals. Specifically, our program is developed for working professionals. So it's a giant plus, and you definitely can use a lot of your experience to further get an additional master's degree or go more in depth with it. As far as PhD programs, I believe most PhD programs also like people who bring good topics for further research from their practical experience.
Yeah, and I would say, we definitely don't have a problem with anybody who's got a master's in a different area already. It shows that you can think at a higher level and can complete a master's degree. So if you're looking to make a switch, I don't think that's a problem for most programs. Same with PhD programs. Most of them will take people with masters. And I don't want to like pump any particular program, not even my own, but there are some programs that are PhD programs that specifically only take people with masters, and they have like a track, because you already would have had a thesis done, that is a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, I've seen that when I was in graduate school, there were a few people that came in with their master's in something else, and it did speed them up a little bit. They still had to take the Psych masters en route though. So they earn their Psych masters en route to PhD. So it's going to vary, and you should ask those questions of the programs that you're applying to. We have a question about what kind of experience, I think this kind of piggybacks on that. What kind of experience do universities offering master's program require compared to PhD? Can someone answer that one? Ludmilla or Joe, maybe?
Sure. Again, it's my perspective, but typically you would bring so sorry, now the question went away. So what kind of experience they would require? It depends on the specific program. I think both types of programs might like some work experience. PhD programs typically would like more undergraduate research experience. There will be more emphasis on undergraduate research experience, or maybe master's preparation. For master's programs, there might be a little bit more interest in internships or work experience, especially if it is an applied master's. But there is quite a bit of overlap, because research and practice overlap a lot in IO psychology. So I don't think it's very particular. If you don't have X, you cannot substitute with Y. There's a lot of things. If you worked for 5 years in HR versus you have done a research project, you can say, well, some of the skills are transferable.
Yeah, and I like the way she put like the X versus Y. Like when I'm looking at application, it's, what do you want to have to show the application board, the people making the decision, like what you've done and who you are and why you want to do IO. So that could be working, that could be research, it could be, helping run a student organization, really any of those things. I think at PhD, you're definitely going to have them looking a little bit more at research, but again, you might, depending on the program, might be able to replace it. Also, just sometimes with the PhD, it's tends to be more competitive. So anything you can do to get into the groups that they're going to be interviewing, that's always helpful.
So there are two questions here that I marked that are really about the job market and the outlook, the general outlook for IO psychologists. Is anyone up to date on this data? I know a couple of years ago, Psych was touting an independent finding that said IO psychologist was in the top 10 fastest growing jobs in the US. But does someone else want to comment on that?
That was an ABC News report, and it was number one in the top 10, or it was the best paying among the top 10 too. I think the last that I saw, it was still in the growing. I don't know if it's still top 10. Sorry, I think I cut off Ludmila.
That's okay. I was just going to say that statistics such as BLS sometimes are a lagging indicator. We don't get them until maybe a couple of years after, there's been processed. And right now things change a lot. And I think what we see with how much change we experienced in the workplace during the pandemic and how much we will need to adjust and rework the entire system, I think we have a lot of job security in the coming decade, at the very least, and probably beyond that, because even if a data doesn't show it, the kinds of changes that occur in society and in the workplace will require a lot of generating new research, a lot of developing new best practices, and a lot of education.
Yeah, and this is anecdotal, but I can say that our last two graduating classes, which is a total of 25 people, are all hired into the industry, and that's graduating into a pandemic. So yeah, she was saying it's if you're gonna graduate right now, IO is a good one to be in because work's changing and a lot's happening at work.
We just had 3 students. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The 3 students who are still in the program, just 1 year in, and they got jobs in huge name organizations halfway through the program.
Right. Yeah. That's very encouraging. I think from an HR perspective, I mean, the job market is very strong right now for our HR majors who are coming out with just an undergraduate degree. And I would say IO psychologists having a graduate degree in IO psychology gives you another leg up in terms of being able to strategically inform the types of issues that HR is trying to make decisions about. So for me, the job outlook seems like it would be really strong for all the reasons that Joe and Ludmila said also. Another question here is about university prestige for IO psychology. It says, for instance, would a degree from an Ivy League or private be preferred by an employer over public? I'll let the other panelists weigh in on this too, but I think it depends on where you're going. So there are going to be big organizations that only recruit or only have a really strong recruiting relationship, sorry for the train in the background, with specific universities. But if you're getting good training, I think that's more important than the prestige or whether it's an Ivy League school. You can get really good training at a lot of schools that offer very strong IO psychology programs. So I would look more at the professors that are there, the type of work that you're going to get to do, and the type of training and preparation students coming out of the program have, and the types of jobs they're getting. So I'll let the others weigh in on that as well.
Just a little bit that it's very different, I think, from a typical undergraduate where sometimes people look at the university in general. For IO, people are much more likely to look at specific program. And I wish I would say prestige doesn't matter at all. And in many cases, who you are, what you learned, and your faculty matter, but also don't downplay public universities, because some of the top specifically IO programs are in public universities. And for disclosure, I am in a private university, but literally just don't look at the institutional type, look more specifically at the program.
Yeah, and I would, in terms of if you're going to look at rankings, look at the rankings for IO psychology, not like the school overall. I was actually going to say I don't even know if there is an Ivy League school that has IO, but I Googled it and apparently Harvard has one now, but it's online extension. So I don't really know if it's the most highest on their priority list.
I'd agree with all that. I would keep in mind, though, if you intend to go to an organization where there aren't a lot of other IO psychologists, the recognition of the quality of that program might not be as immediate. So you might go to a top 10 IO program, but if you're being hired by someone in a completely different, area of study, it's possible they wouldn't, have the same appreciation for it.
I was going to go ahead, if we're done with that, to jump on the GRE question. Yeah, so this is a very interesting time, I think, for grad programs, because a lot of schools, especially in IO, because we understand the importance of diversity and we know that some of these exams, including the GRE, can have bias in them, are deciding what to do with the GRE. So in general, a lot of programs are dropping it or making it optional. Ours is optional right now. In terms of those that have it and what they weigh it, it's going to really differ by school. Some schools may use it just as a number that's there and they use it as part of it. Other schools, particularly like top PhD programs, are probably going to like put GRE and GPA into a formula and then only interview the 10 people that have the highest score on that formula. And unfortunately, that's how some of them have to do it, because they get 300 applications and they can't read every single letter,
There are a couple related questions about the GRE. I don't know if you can answer those as well. Whether there are other exams and how much weight is put toward them.
I know some programs will take the GMAT. I think we were when we required the GRE back then. But yeah, I would say most programs are putting a lot less weight on it if they're requiring it. But I have seen some schools, be relatively, I don't want to say adamant, but strong with saying that they're keeping it for now. They may be trying to do other things to avoid the adverse impact that can be caused by GRE and other scores like that.
There's a question about the timing of taking the GRE too.
Yeah, I would say probably because you're going to be applying the fall of your senior year most likely, or fall of whatever year you want to go. So I would recommend taking it towards the end of junior year or over the summer, especially in case you want to take it again, because you can always use your highest score when you're submitting it. So it's nice to have the option to take it again if you want.
What are the other things that you're looking for in the programs that you represent, at least, in terms of these other work experiences or research experience, or what are you weighing higher instead? Paisley asked that question.
If I may answer that and kind of answer one of the research questions that popped there. We look at the statement of purpose very carefully and the interview along with work experience and resume. And for us, from our Master of Science, which requires thesis, we actually really want students to tell us how they get from their work experience and from their life experience, if not to the research topic specifically, then to particular area that they're interested in, or they just have a passion to explore, because I think that's something that really helps students to get at least a first step towards refining their research topic. So for us, it's very important how the student can look at what they know, even if it's not a tremendous amount, and integrate it with where they want to go. So all the different pieces of prior education, of prior experience, and then how students can translate it into their goals for the graduate program, that's really the key.
Yeah, I'll add on to the research question as well about generating research ideas and how do you come up with that? For me, it's always been just observing the world around me. And then I take it to the literature and look to see what's actually been done about that. So I am just natural, I guess maybe I'm naturally a categorizer or something, or trying to explain why things happen around me. And that is what psychology is about. And so I see things that interest me and I just go look and see if it's been researched yet or what has been researched about that. And if you look in the discussion section of any research article, it'll say what still needs to be done. And usually there are review articles or meta-analyses that are articles that summarize the literature, and they give very good recommendations too for things that still need to be researched. So if you're having trouble coming up with ideas on your own, maybe ask some people that work and what are the big issues that seem to arise in the workplace, or what are the big conflicts that come up, or what are the big things that really bother them maybe about their work or their leader or their coworkers. Those are good places to start. I see a question here on job and life fulfillment. I think in general, for those of us who chose this path, people that are IO psychologists that I know are pretty passionate about it. So it's really whether you find the topics interesting. So for me, I find it extremely fulfilling. I find research fun and engaging, and I find working with students extremely fulfilling. So that would be my answer. If anyone else wants to pipe in on that one.
The same, if you find something that we're really passionate about, it really is, you're having fun and you're getting paid for it. It's even if you have to work hard. So really finding the fit and not something that, okay, I have to do it because everybody is doing, but something that you personally are passionate about is really the key. It's great fun.
Yeah, I mean, I like working with students, which is why I love academia, but I like being an IO because it's when you tell people, they don't know what it is. When you tell them about it, they can relate to it because, you know, they have stress at their work, or, you know, they would know what it's like to go through an interview and things like that. So I think it's very relatable and it's really interesting. But yeah, I think sometimes students, particularly in psychology, they look at, okay, good salary, good job outlook in IO, and they might just go into it for those reasons. And you know, those are great things about IO, but I wouldn't go into it just because of that. Go into it because you find it interesting and it's something that you want to do in some capacity for the rest of your life. And one of the nice things about IO is there's at least probably 100 different things you could do with it, if not more. So that does help a little.
And I'd add that for applied jobs, you know, you also get to see the outcome of all of your work and approach important problems, including important societal problems. One of the projects that I work on is to try to prevent teen tobacco use. So to be able to use the skills that you honed in school for something like that you think is important is a really nice way to spend your time.
Okay, we are getting close to the end. Be sure that you're looking in the Q&A for all those who are still here on the answered questions if you haven't been looking at that, because we have typed answers to a lot of these as well. There's one question about online IO programs for working professionals. Does anyone want to address that?
It's definitely a sensitive one because you don't want to say yes or no to the entire range of programs. And obviously there have been some online programs that are giving bad name to everything, but it doesn't mean that there are no good programs. And again, look at their website, look at what they're doing, how much information are they giving to you, what are the outcomes of their students. And we're just starting our online program, and we wouldn't have, because before the pandemic we thought it was not a way to go, but now we think, oh yeah, you can do a good job online. But when you're looking at programs, just see how much information do they give you, how much information you can get before you have to give them your personal information. That's usually a good sign when you can get a lot of information on the website, and it's not just like, okay, give us your information, we'll get back to you. And try to find out from the actual people just how rigorous the coursework is, and how available other faculty, and what are the student outcomes, learning career, are they able to go further, what are they able to accomplish. So that's a general thing, because again, mode of delivery can have a reputation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire mode of delivery is the same. You need to look for specifics within each particular program. Sorry if it's vague.
Well, that's
Yeah,
good.
and in terms of online program, like I would say, like look at the reputation of the actual programs there. It's like anything else. And usually if you've got places that are doing IO and they're adding an online program, then they've got the experts there, they know how to deliver a good product, as opposed to, let's say, those more for-profit large online universities that don't know anything about IO but know that they want to add another degree to their staple.
All right, there's one more here. I just answered a question about diversity and enhancing diversity, but I realized Ludmila might want to actually weigh in on this one. I just said, we often talk about what I think the question was something along the lines of, how do we solve the diversity problem or a diversity problem in an organization or in a field? And we really have to think early upstream in terms of supply. So how do we get more candidates and more people interested and more people qualified to go along that path? And so when we talk about enhancing diversity in an organization, we need a more diverse applicant pool. So how do we find more different people from different categories, whatever type of diversity we're seeking, to actually apply for the job, so that we can then get a higher quality applicant pool in terms of diversity as well. So I don't know if Ludmila wants to add on to that.
Absolutely. And yes, I found the question. It definitely is a matter of pipeline, bringing people in, but also I think what the field does, because for a very long time, IO definitely served the interests of those in power. And the more we do things that actually help people who have been structurally underprivileged, structurally oppressed, and try to increase fairness and equality in organizations, I think when people see this kind of emphasis within the field, I think that will also attract more students who are interested in this sort of topic. So that would be kind of a higher level answer, because people are definitely attracted to where they emotionally feel like they can make a difference. And if people want to make a difference for specific groups, whether it's based on gender or race or disability, traditionally, sometimes they have gone to other fields, which is unfortunate, because I think we have the best toolbox to actually make a difference, but we need to use this toolbox more clearly, consistently, and publicly to improve the work of different kinds of people in the workplace. And I think we're doing it much better now than we did when I started in the field, which was 20 years ago. So I think we're getting there, and I think maybe pandemic actually gave us a very good push in the right direction. Anyone else?
Great. Yeah, I don't see any other questions coming through. So I've answered several here to refer people to psyop.org. That's SIOP.org. And they have a lot of really great resources for just getting a preview of the field. They have a video they did for prospective graduate students, like many of you may be on the call. And just to give you a preview of what kinds of careers and things you would find yourselves doing if you pursued this career. Also, our previous videos that we've done, webinars we've done for this committee, our committee is all about the bridge builders. We're all about getting exposure out to people like you to try to understand more about IO psychology as a career and get that information to you so you know how to pursue it if that's something interesting. So when I send out the email with a follow-up with the recording link, I'll also share links to all of those resources. So at this point, I think I just want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for joining the call tonight. And thank you to all the participants for coming and asking great questions. And we will be in touch. Please watch for the email from me, probably sometime later this week. And look forward to having you on the next webinar. If that's something you're interested in, you can definitely also follow up if you would like to ask any specific questions to any of us. So thanks to all of you and have a great evening.
Thank you very much.